the conviction of the heart is pretty simple. Jesus will for a Catholic Church to be in that place because he, through his sacraments, wants to transform people's lives today, not in the past, today. And the transformation of today, of people's hearts, will lead to the growth tomorrow.
Welcome to Magnified Ministry Podcast, the podcast dedicated to inspiring, encouraging, and equipping parish leaders to build thriving missionary communities in today's rapidly changing world. This is the Magnified Ministry Podcast. Welcome back to the Magnified Ministry Podcast, question and answer edition. Excited for this one.
Yeah, no kidding.
Zach, our producer, has been loading up on questions for us, and we're going to ask a bunch of questions, but really kind of framed around three specific topics, all courtesy of you, our listeners.
So thank you for sending them to us.
Keep listening, keep sending, and just thank you again. So the three kind of topics that people were really interested in unpacking. The first one is you guys have talked a lot about, and with your guests, around how to get started. And you obviously are using a lot of examples of your context, urban, young, growing neighborhood. Great, but what if that's not the reality of the community that I live in, right? And then kind of as part of that, this tension between, do you start with the people that are in the church or do you start with the people that are not in the church, right? So it's this question of, how do I get started and where do I start? The second,
why don't we just start with that?
Great. We'll come back to the others if we have time.
Because I think that's a good idea to just kind of go one by one.
Yeah, let's do that.
I think that's an excellent question. I think we are not always growing and we are not always young, right? So there's a lot of presumption in that question itself, right? St. Clement was always young, was always had a lot of people, was always had a lot of money, and all those things are not true.
The neighborhood, maybe at some point in some cases, but
yeah. Well, the neighborhood. Remember, this was one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city.
It was very dangerous too.
We had to sell every piece of property that we own just to keep the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was not a long time ago. That was in the early '80s.
Mm-hmm.
So that is actually not true, right? But I get you, like you're in a different context. And I think that's great because in your context, God is still calling you to growth and to mission versus maintenance, right? So it's not, I think there's a number of steps. You always start with people around you, right? You don't start with people who are not in the church. You can't. You don't know them. They're not there. So you always start in the people in the front of you. I think you do a number of steps. First, you pray, right? You pray and you say, God, why did you put this church on the corner of those streets? What was your vision? Why is the Catholic Church here? What's the mission that Jesus gave us specifically in this community? One. Second is you pull some of the parish leaders, people in your parish, and you do the same thing with them. You meet them maybe 5 times, 6 times. You schedule time for prayer, discernment. What is God awakening in your heart? What do you think is God's dream for the church? And secondly is you start teaching them, right, about the possibilities. So you take whether it's James Mallon's book on divine renovation, whether it's any other book about church renewal. But what you want to do is you want to lean into helping people to understand renewal actually is possible and it's happening all across the world. That's number 2. Number 3 is then you start the brainstorming with that team of saying, well, what does that mean for us? So we don't have any young people. All our people are in their 60s or 70s, some people in their 50s. What's our starting point? That would be very different than St. Clement. Maybe your parish, people would come to church in the mid-morning, not in the evenings. Maybe people don't like driving in the evenings, right? Maybe your starting point is weekends, not the weekdays, because of how you're surrounded in the farming communities. Yeah. Maybe it's the seasonal thing. Maybe winter is a slow season for people, and that's your biggest engagement time. Not the summer. Maybe you have a lot of snowbirds, and so winter actually is your engagement season when you have influence, because in the summer they're all out of Florida, you name it. So there's a lot of those movements, right? But the conviction of the heart is pretty simple. Jesus will for a Catholic Church to be in that place because he, through his sacraments, wants to transform people's lives today, not in the past, today. And the transformation of today, of people's hearts, will lead to the growth tomorrow. So I think that's really important to keep that in mind, right? There are some simple steps, but you do have to. So if you are not a pastor, you approach the pastor, you brainstorm,
Yeah.
you pull a group of people and you say, would you be interested to have a discussion over the next 10 weeks of how to grow our church?
Yeah.
And guess what? Some things will fail, and that's okay. And some things will go really well.
But I think that's that's it, right? Like the image that was coming to my mind, particularly in this, how do I get started, regardless of context,
Yeah.
it's all about spreading seeds, right? We talked about this. It's a parable of the sower, right? The role of the farmer is not to not sow seeds in each of the 4 different plots of land, right? The role of the farmer in the story is like, hey, I'm gonna spread seed in this grass, and in this, it's rocky, fine, there's still seeds going. The thorns, fine, still seeds going. Dry, okay, seeds still going. Fertile, okay, seeds still going. He's still spreading seeds. And in some ways, I find this element of like sparking renewal not too differently, right? Like I remember when I first was given Divine Renovation by you, I was like, okay, cool, interesting book. I read it and I was like, oh my goodness, like it's given me words to things that I've been feeling, and it just sort of like
Exactly.
lit something in me. And I thought everybody and their mother needs to read this book. So I started giving the book to everyone, and people had very different reactions. Some people had the same reactions I did, or even more, like, oh my goodness, this is mind blowing. Other people were like, it's fine. Like, we're already doing Divine Renovation. And I was like, what parish? This one? And then some people were like, this is terrible. Like, I don't know why we would ever consider doing anything like that. And I didn't understand why everyone wasn't like super on board.
Yeah.
It was the same when we were working at the Arch. Like, we thought, here's this incredible opportunity. But there were some parishes and leaders that didn't feel that way. And that's okay. It's just not where they were at that particular moment. But that didn't stop us from sharing things that we thought would be interesting for people. So start somewhere. There's so many resources online. Do a little video. If people get caught onto that, do the book, talk with people, and then see who else gets attracted by that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of it is just recognizing that if you have this desire in your heart as a leader to grow the church, to bring people to Jesus, that's already a movement of the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
Remember, God always honors movement.
Yeah.
So if you do nothing with it, nothing will happen. But if you act on it, it won't be perfect. It will not be easy, but it is absolutely doable. I mean, you will start seeing movement in the right direction, right? And so I just really encourage you to start from where you are.
And be open and be ready, because you will be in a very different
And
place
don't compare yourself to the churches
Yeah,
that
don't
are
do that.
5-10
It doesn't
years
matter.
into it, right? Because that's just unfair to any community, right?
And honestly,
We started our alpha with 20 people.
yeah, and I think I mean, and you always look at like HDB8, and it's like, who cares? The numbers don't matter. It's the names. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. It's the depth of discipleship that you end up getting to.
That's right.
Right? And Jesus didn't care about, of course he cared about the masses, but I don't think he ever sat back and be like, I just preached to 5,000 guys. Like, how awesome am I? It was like, no, it's like, is there one that really transformed, right? He cares about the one. Cool. I think that was a great question. Producer Zach gave us another question, which is around the challenge of our intergenerational church, right? And I think the question, as it was written, was, is it possible for a missional or a church that's renewing to be intergenerational? And how do we think about the real differences between
Sure.
some of the older generations, boomers, Gen X, I guess millennials, and some of the younger generations, Gen Z, Alpha? Like, there's some real differences.
Absolutely.
How do we, A, can we bring them together under one roof?
Yeah.
And then B, how can we do that?
Excellent question. I think churches are trying to do it well. It is, as you said, the struggle is in different levels of needs, right? People are looking for different things. So I would say, yes, it's possible to build intergenerational church, but you also have to be smart about what is intergenerational and what will remain generational, because that's what people need, right? So
point.
I always think about simple things like, Gen Zs are asking different questions around God. They're, every generation before Gen Zs, their first question was like, what is God real? Is Bible real? Their first generation is is God good?
It's a
Is
good-
Bible good? Can I experience goodness? That's a different question than somebody in their 40s, 50s ask. So like when we run Alpha, we actually do divide people into different generations because they tend to ask different questions. And when we didn't do that, what we found is the experience was worse.
Both in terms of the groups, but also even where you run some of it, right? Like I think that's correct, right? Like the younger groups are together
Yeah.
within, like, you got groups of 20s and 25s, but then also they're being run in separate spaces as well, both for size, but also for the experience as well.
Yeah. We changed that actually. Now they're mixed up.
Okay. So
Um,
you learned, okay, you kind of went back.
but what it's important is that there's some things that you want to keep separated because they're just different. Like the
Yeah.
spirituality of men and women is different,
Yeah.
right? So we do women's series, men's series. We do it differently. And the reason why we do it differently is because we simply have different spirituality, and it's good for us to feed our spirituality differently, right? So I think that's really, really important. But then there's great opportunities for bringing
Yeah.
people together,
So
right?
like, what
And
are some
so,
good examples of when you would say, like, this is a great moment
sure.
for intergenerational worship or fellowship or mentorship?
Well, the
or what
worship
have
is
you?
every weekend, so that's
Okay,
an easy one
that's
to
an
me,
easy
right?
one.
It's like we have everybody involved in the liturgy, all ages, and that's easy one. You just make sure that you have the right representation, that you call people from every group to be involved in your liturgy. The second, the easiest one is service, right? Because we do here service day twice a year as a service day of the parish, fall and spring. Hundreds of people come together in service. People in their 80s and people in their who are 15. That's an easy one, and people learn about each other, and then we do a meal together, and so people can learn each other's stories. Service is always an easy opportunity, right? Advent, Lent, all those service opportunities when we pull teams together, they really are diversified, and it's easy, and people are really loving working with different age groups, right? The other one is our executive series, right? So we have people from all different walks of life, women and men, participating in executive speaker series. We do that precisely through them because of the mentoring desire, right? The young adults are looking for mentors. They're looking for people who can inspire them, help them to figure out life, especially when they're far away from the parents. The older people are looking for purpose in now putting their experience into practice, and so it becomes a wonderful, very natural way of sharing best practices, sharing their life journey, sharing the insight, right? So to me, that's an easy one. So yes, it is possible to do intergenerational ministries, intergenerational exchange, but you also want to really recognize that people are coming with different questions, and so you also don't want to focus so much on their intergenerational experience as to sacrifice why people are actually there and really honor their own questions.
I mean, that's a great point, right? Because I know, one of the tensions that can happen, right? Especially if you are becoming missional and you're attracting young people. Like, people may feel like, well, why is it all about them, right? What about us? And not that I have felt that, 'cause I'm still young, right? I still fall in that young-ish category. But it is this sort of like recognition of like, yeah, we should be investing in our children and the children of the parish and the young people of the parish, because they're not just the future, they're the present, right? And that doesn't mean that we're not saying, people my generation and above me don't matter. It's just that it's okay to overemphasize in this particular season in the next generation, because we recognize there's an outpouring, but there is a real tension there, right?
Yeah, it is. And again, you serve every generation, right? You offer stuff to every generation. We just happen that our biggest pool of parishioners are in their 20s.
That's a good point.
That's just us, right? It's just that's St. Clement. For you, that might be people in their 40s, 50s, 60s. That will be the main bulk of your service because that's who is in your pews. And then you will try to serve everybody around that. So I don't think it's one or the other. You do both. But also what's important, which we had to really discern here at St. Clement, is that you also want to prepare people for intergenerational ministry. And what I mean by it is that sometimes I also have people approach us, who are older in their 60s, 70s, and they say, oh, we want intergenerational ministry with young adults so we can teach them. And so they put on this head of like, you young, you don't know anything, you never experienced suffering. I actually been part of this conversation once that was just horrifying. It was this young guy in his 20s talking to this guy in his 50s, and the guy in the 50s was like, oh, you just, you are a consultant, you make a lot of money, you went to good school, you don't understand suffering, you don't know anything about life. Well, little did we know, this guy in the last year, he lost his dad to cancer and his brother to suicide. And my heart was breaking listening to that, because I was thinking, you have no idea the depth of the suffering this young man has been through. But now you came with preaching attitude to him, and that's not intergenerational ministry. And I think we have to really prepare people for it, because I think sometimes people come and say, we'll teach those young people about Jesus, we'll tell them the truth.
Yep.
And the point is like, you don't know what God has been doing in their life. You don't know what they've been through. And so you have to come. If you want to really accompany each other and be in a community, you have to come with open minds. And that applies to everybody, the younger and the older. And I think you as a church have to really prepare for it. Otherwise, a lot of people will get hurt.
And that's really powerful, right? I think at the heart of it is same challenge that people will run into when you're trying to reach those that aren't here, right? The people that have been here for a long time.
Yeah.
The attitude can be, like, no, we'll teach those heathens or those non-believers like how to actually believe. And it's like, no, like, we recognize that God is at work in
That's
them.
right.
And so our role is not to teach them. Our role is to hold the space. And that is really hard, because when you, like, I was reading something earlier today, right? Like the curse of knowledge. Because you know or think you know a lot, it actually can be detrimental.
That's right.
Anyway, I think we've talked about this question enough.
So do it, but do it in a smart way.
Be smart about it. The third theme that came up in some of the questions that we received was this. Again, we're talking a lot about tensions today, but how do you reconcile, right, the fact and the truth that there is so much beauty in tradition and so much depth in our orthodoxy, right, as a Catholic Church.
Sure.
And we have an incredible set of beliefs, theology, depth, all of this stuff, with the reality that we live in a world that inclusivity really matters, right? And we're not trying to get into any sort of political elements here, but just this idea of, like, sometimes the church and some of the things that the church says or the words can be very harsh, can seem judgmental, can seem like just off-putting to people. How do we reconcile that with the need to be, like, open-minded and inclusive? And I think that's a really hard challenge that I think people are wrestling with, is like, how can I take what I know to be true and bring it into this world without turning somebody off immediately, and being welcoming to them?
I think there is a false belief that inclusivity excludes orthodoxy. Right? Like, one of the most inclusive parishes here at the Archdiocese is St. John Conchas. The priests at St. John Conchas do unbelievable work, ministry. I mean, they meet people where they are, they encourage them, and yet they celebrate in Latin. They have, ton of sacraments. And so, like, you want to see how inclusivity and orthodoxy work together? Well, go to John Conchas. I actually will see it. I pray you see it here at St. Clement when you come to experience our community. So I don't think one excludes the other. I think the teaching Jesus mandated us to teach the faith. And so we ought to do it. We do it through our preaching. We do it through our courses. We do it through teaching the next generation. But the difference is, do you want to preach and teach to the empty church, or do you want to preach and teach to hundreds of people, right? And so what the inclusivity is starting in a dialogue with the generation or with people where they are, right? It's just you approach and meet people where they are, right? Whether it's through social media, whether it's through events. So the first step, the thing about, like, when people meet each other, like, I do so much wedding prep, marriage prep, and we prepare 140 plus couples for wedding here at St. Clement. So we do a lot of weddings every weekend, and very few couples that I talk to say, "Oh, that was a love from first sight." Like, they felt something, But then they grew as they started dating each other. It's the same way with following in love with Jesus. Some people have an instant follow in love with Jesus. They come to church, they're surrounded
The
by
Paul
the beauty
moment.
of it.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my gosh, I know God is real. How do I follow him? How do I get baptized? Other people need time. And the point is the inclusivity, if you will. What that is the time we give them to get to know who Jesus is, what the community is. So that's why we run Theology on Tap. That's why we do Wine Down Wednesdays. That's why we do game nights. We do all those things not because we want to entertain people. We do it as to help people to experience what authentic Christian community that is based on the teaching of Jesus looks like. We are kind people. We welcome everybody. We encourage people, right? All those things. And then once you dip your toes in, we start inviting you and encouraging you to say, now, how are you growing in your faith? Like, so what's your prayer life? We offer prayer courses. Do you know the Bible? We offer Bible courses. Are you growing an understanding of the church? Right? We do courses on Nicene Creed. We do the courses on um, Catholic ethics and moral teaching of the church. Right? So we encourage you and invite you, and then we invite you to service. We say again, this cannot be about you and your Jesus. We are a Catholic church. We then go forth in service. And so how are you then serving others? So I don't think one excludes the other. I think one builds on the other. But in order to have people confess Jesus to be the Lord, you have to actually have a way of approaching them and communicating with them in a way that they understand if they never heard about Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And then you lead them to learn the language about Jesus and the language of Jesus. And then you empower them to share that language with people in a way that builds communion. So I think we always done it, right? I mean, look what missionaries did. That's how they've done it, right? And so I think that's always the goal. So it's not one or the other. I think we absolutely have to do both.
Well, and I think it's not about watering anything down, right? I don't think that's not at all what I think will speak to people and really take root in somebody's heart, right? Because if you take any teaching or anything, right, and you water it down or you make it like, maybe not, that's where I think.
Well, would you date somebody who tells you, I might love you, but I might not love you? You would not continue, right? It's the same thing. I mean, remember, the relationship with Christ is the relationship of love, right? And
true.
So I think that's as simple as that is.
No, that's a good way to put it. I like that. I like that analogy.
You have to cultivate the love of Jesus through the church. And Jesus gave us the language and the church gave us the language. So it might be challenging, and it is challenging to all of us.
Exactly. But I think that's the key, right? Like, I think the challenge, I think, for us as leaders is to be rooted enough ourselves and grounded enough in the teachings of Jesus in the context of the Roman Catholic, church, so that we are able to take that and translate it, into the current time, right? It doesn't mean change it. It just means recognizing that, hey,
well, that's Second Vatican Council, right?
Exactly. I could not have a conversation with someone that asked me like, why do you believe, Jesus, like, oh, because I believe in the transubstantiation and the Eucharist and all this stuff. They're going to look at me like I have four heads, right? But I was having a conversation with our son Mark over the weekend, and we were just talking, and he was like, oh, my favorite part about Mass is communion. And I'm like, why is your favorite part communion? I mean, he can't even take communion. He's like, because that's where I get to, I asked him, I was like, why do you think it is? He's like, well, it's where you get to be with Jesus. And I thought to myself, this is a 5-year-old that doesn't understand all of the the Eucharistic theology and all of that stuff, but he understands the true meaning of the word Eucharist, which is to give thanks. And he understands that at that moment, you get to be with Jesus in a very intimate way. Like,
it's powerful,
right? And it's like sometimes we try to overcomplicate things with our language and try to make it sound so like PhD level, and it is, because it's rich. But I think we've got to find ways to take the depth and make it like drip by drip for people.
And you go back to the joy of the gospel, to Pope Francis, and and he beautifully speaks, right, about he dreamt of the church that is filled with missionary option, right, with people
Yeah.
leading other people to faith and accompany people. And this whole synodal process that he started is all about accompaniment, right? Am I loving enough to accompany you? Because guess what? It's much easier to ignore you and say,
It is.
you know what, I'm just not going to bother with you. I'm not going to spend my, but it's much more, but that's not what Jesus does, right? That's not that's not what the scripture tells us. So what we have to do is we have to accompany each other, knowing that we all are different, but that's the blessing of the diversity of being a church, right?
And
What I do here in
yes, I
US and
love that.
Chicago would
Is
never work
never
in my home
in
city in
Poland.
Poland. It would just never work.
Same in Mexico, right?
But
Same on the south side of Chicago,
but
right? Like
the
there's
things they do there are bringing great fruit because
yes.
of they understand where their people are. They know their people, and then they know how to speak the gospel to their lives.
And I think that is ultimately the key, right? Is the one truth about all of us is that we all fall short of the glory of God, right? And we need
It's all about grace, man.
that, right? And we need a savior. And just because we are accompanying others that are further down the path, that's the one thing that I've kind of realized is the journey of faith is not linear.
Mm-mm.
It's kind of not something I think we can comprehend. It just is. It just is. And just because we've walked with the Lord for longer than someone has doesn't make us any less sinful or any less broken than them. I think that's one of the key unlocks, right? Is like, I think I'm able to journey better with people now because I recognize how sinful I am. And if only people knew how much, brokenness I have and how much pain I can cause some people, they'd be like, wow, how can you be on this podcast talking to people? And it's like, well, because I recognize that I need a savior, right? And I think that moment when you have that realization of I'm so broken that I need Jesus in my life to help me and to journey with me is that then connection that you're able to have with other people.
That's right.
Right. And so I think what we're saying is do not throw away the orthodoxy. Do not get rid of it. Get rooted in it and find ways to speak to people about it in a way that they'll be able to understand in today's terms and walk them little by little into the depths and beauty of the church.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you for sending us questions. There were a lot of other
Send
questions.
us more.
But
Zach
we
is
try to put
is
them
typing away.
in some themes, and
Yeah.
you can visit the website for more resources, magnifiedministry.org, and we are just overjoyed to see you again.
Thank you again for joining us for this Q&A. It was great to see you, and we'll see you soon.